Well, welcome back to another episode of Breaking Badness. We are very excited today. We've got two guests. One you're familiar with likely, Daniel Schwalbe, DomainTools CISO and Head of Investigations. But we are also joined with Wes Young from CSIRT's Gadgets. Welcome, everybody.
Hi. Hello.
Awesome. We are going to be talking a little bit about some DomainTools Investigations research that came out recently and some community iteration. And that's why Wes is here today. So I wanted to get his perspective on the research and what his findings were like, how he arrived at those, and also just your relationship. Daniel and Wes, you go back a few years, which is really interesting. We were talking offline before we hit record on the community being small and relationships popping back up, which is really cool. And I think we'll cover that as well. Actually, before we get too far, Wes, could you introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, my name is Wes Young. I'm owner of CSIRT Gadgets. I'm created a service called AlphaHunt. I'm previously from the run ISAC and QIntel and Salesforce. And I'm one of those 60-40, 70-30 engineer analyst. And so I grew up in the analyst world doing network intrusion detection, snort rules, CNCs. How do we get intelligence into those detection mechanisms so we actually do something about it? And so I grew up in the higher education realm where everything was a free-for-all. And we had the idea, like, how can we get all these CNCs in one common place? So I bootstrapped sort of one of the early open source frameworks called Collective Intelligence Framework, where you take all the IOCs and indicators and hashes and IPs you can find and shove them in a database and then get them right back out to the snort sensors. So within 15, 20 minutes of finding something, you can alert your higher ed peers, hey, this thing's a C2. And sort of my work has evolved from there. CSIRT Gadgets was a place where we warehoused a lot of that intellectual property that we built. And I've done some contracting over the years, but I've always lived in the analyst side where I want to sit next to the analyst. I want to figure out, okay, I don't want to read. I don't like to read. There's too many words on a lot of these blog posts, but how do I get that intelligence into something that can do something, just raise that barrier for the bad guys? And so that led to working with QIntel and doing some more of the e-crime sort of stuff and learning how threat actors really operate and really sticking it that way. And just working with law enforcement, how do we put bad guys in jail? How do we go after and do some actual physical damage in the real world? And then working with Salesforce on, there's this idea that you can store indicators in a database, and that's great, but how do you connect those things together? And so we worked with a group called Vertex Synapse and how do you take intelligence, put it in the graph, and actually, make it analyst friendly so that you can start connecting the dots faster. It's one thing to have an IP address on one side. It's another to see a threat actor on the other. And while there's lots of different threat actors and clusters or intrusion sets, depending on how you name those things, we want to be able to have analysts answer those questions quickly. And kind of the only way you can do that is with a graph. And so we worked with Vertex Synapse, where the guys who wrote the original APT1 report, the Mandiant folks, they're clear of the concept of working on some really cool graph technology for a number of years. And we were able to roll that together and me put my engineering hat on alongside a number of great, world-renowned analysts and help them bootstrap. How do we build a giant graph where we can track threat actors that are looking at us and to identify, okay, there's 3 million intrusion sets or threat actors in the world. We've got a finite number of resources. How do we pick the top 10? How do we pick the top 20? And graphs are really the only way to do that, and led to what you saw working off of Daniel's work. Hey, that's a really cool blog post. There's a lot of indicators in that blog post, a lot of indicators in that blog post. I'm not going to read all of those indicators, but I need to put it in my intelligence graph. I want to understand. So the next time I come across something that's some common TTP or some common IOC, I can quickly put the pieces together and say, oh, that's Silver Fox, or oh, that's connected to this other intrusion set. Not because I necessarily care which threat actor is doing it, but if I gather enough of those together, I can start to say, this threat actor targets this group, and we don't have problems, we don't have intersections with that group. So maybe they're not on the top of our list. Or maybe we have intersections with that group and they should be at the top of our list. And so my background goes from looking at the wire and packets all the way up through, how do I help new analysts think like seasoned analysts and help them learn how to connect the dots? Because there's 20 years of experience in there. And to get a new analyst bootstrapped, it takes months and months until they're useful. Not that they're not useful day one, but the amount of principal time that goes into training them is a lot of work across the organization. And then they have to stick around for a while. And so I'm trying to help solve that middle area between, hey, you do network intrusion detection, you think hashes are cool, you think IP addresses are cool. Let's get you to that next step. You can understand the geopolitics. You can understand the people behind it, their motivations. Because there's a couple common mitigations across all these actors that do wonders for the majority of organizations. And so now I'm finding myself full circle into sort of the education space where I want to teach those analysts how to help you as an analyst be useful day one. How do I help you learn like a principal without sucking all the life out of principles to teach you, kind of thing? And so we come full circle to Daniel's work where I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I look at a report, I think like an analyst, and I think, who's behind this? Who could potentially be behind this? And so if you're an analyst in the crowd who's, there's all these other clusters, you're right, I know, but that's not the point. The point is, how do I help new people just start to think, because they're not going to go past that. They're going to read all these things, like, oh, these are cool, this is what they're doing, but there's so many other actors out there, I don't even know where to start, so I'm not going to. And I want to try to fix that.
This effort is really exciting to me because Wes and I have literally known each other for 20 years. We both came up through higher education. I was at the University of Washington, you were at Buffalo. In the early days, I remember having late night beers like, how do we solve the information sharing problem? Because there was barriers to that. People trust that can be solved to a degree unless the community gets too big. Anyway, but this is something that collectively we've been chewing on for a really long time. And now we're finally in positions where we actually can affect some change, which you got to wake her up to get there. And then, but still sticking with that. And what Wes just mentioned is when I ran a SOC was a huge problem. It's like, how do you get these junior people in there? First of all, in government, higher ed, nobody wants to work there in the first place. And then you got to train them. And as soon as you give them a little bit of training, they go out in the private industry and double their money. And then you start all over again. And so having a clear understanding and solving for that problem, and not just in government and higher ed, but in our industry, that's still a problem. You know, I see all of these job ads be like, okay, junior analyst wanted minimum 3 years experience. And I'm like, hold on, how do they get that experience? And that's really a tough problem, but any sort of effort towards addressing that and making it better is music to my ears.
Yeah, I think the first information sharing thing we did within the RAN was we had a wiki page with phishing URLs. And I thought, hey, I know Perl. We could just pull these, scrape the wiki page, turn them into snort IDS rules, and shove them in the sensors. And when you have a small trusted group of individuals, it works really well. You get to 50, 60, 70 participants. It can get a little bit hairy. But at the same time, you put an IP address in a wiki, and 10 minutes later, you can affect everyone else's IDS. Like they start lighting up like, hey, I found this traffic because I was pulling it down regularly. And that's when we realized, hey, you can automate some of this stuff. Now we got lucky in the REN because we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. We had no firewalls could keep up with our traffic. It wasn't that we didn't want firewalls. It's that 1 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig, like those firewalls just didn't exist. And then you layer IPv6 on top of it. And you'd have a lot of vendors like, oh, we totally do this. And you'd put the firewall in and it just wouldn't work. And if you tried to turn on any kind of rules, they wouldn't work because of the traffic. The technology hadn't caught up yet. And so we were doing things like trying to burn rules into these DAG cards because you only up them so many times, but that's the only thing to keep up with sort of the line rate. And it is crappy at the time, but go full circle. And what we realized was, hey, there's this, I'll tie it to you guys. There's a PDNS thing. There's this DNS thing we can get involved. We can do RPZ. Vixie comes along and helps with RPZ, and we start creating zone files with all these DNS names. And it turns out that's even the better way to do it. It was, hey, we can actually preempt these infections. And we had a couple of schools, and this is 2008, 2009. Hey, if we trade domain names and we put these in our zone files and we sinkhole them, they don't get infected in the first place. There's no malware drop. Like I had some schools say, hey, we went from 2,000 help desk requests a month to 0. Now, again, times were simpler back then. There wasn't a lot of actors in the space. But you start to see this, hey, just because we learned how to start trading information and started sharing with each other and building on top of each other's ideas, we went from, we got IP addresses, which sort of works. We get alerts of post-infection to, hey, this zone file idea, we could just make a giant zone file with all the badness in it. And we actually stop the infection and extract without firewalls because we have that constraint. Now, of course, then the bad guys get really smart and start using DGAs and the whole thing goes to hell. But at the same time, it's that you build one idea on top of the other. And you can actually, for an infinite game, which this is not a finite game, this game is never going to end. There's always going to be bad guys, there's always good guys. But for a finite game, if you can send them back to the drawing board for another 2 years, if you can raise the cost of their involvement, you can at least get them off your back for a while. And that's the best you can hope for, sadly enough. But again, in an infinite game, to play another day, you keep playing another day. If you have a breach such that it puts you out of business because you're not playing that game, you're done. It doesn't matter what, it doesn't really matter. You're out of business. But if you can keep that going and you assimilate that cost of doing business and keep raising that bar, you can make a good product, have a good service. you can be in business for a really long time, but it does require you to sit down with people, come up with ideas, work together, share intelligence, even between companies that compete with each other. There's still that common set that's good for everybody. In the REN, we were able to prove that because we couldn't retain talent as hard as Daniel said. But sharing data is easy because most of higher ed, that's what they do. They get funding, they make reports and publish their data. On the ops role, we really got lucky because we didn't have that shareholder problem where the fiduciary responsibility kicks in and says, if you share that, the SEC is not going to like it, other banks, whatever is not going to like it. But in higher ed, yeah, that's what we do, our business model. And so we really grew up in a time where we could do that and capitalize on it. And we had a lot of really cool success stories. To Daniel's point about the SOX stuff, we got to see a lot of things and try a lot of things and actually saw some pretty good results, which was
Yeah, I completely agree. I wouldn't want to miss that time for anything. It was crazy, it was wild, and universities, at least in the US, historically, early to the internet, giant pipes, Internet 2 connections. And so the problem to solve for, as Wes mentioned, like we couldn't buy firewalls that could handle that kind of speed. Or if you could, carrier class, multi-million-dollar devices. That wasn't going to happen because higher ed is not generally made of money. It really forced us to dive in there. And I think we had the luxury that, we came about, and then early days of internet security, where it was, okay, we can just try some things and make some things up. And if we have success, great. And if it's not successful, we'll move on and try something else. And being in a research-friendly environment, there's tons of politics, and that was very frustrating and ups and downs as far as that goes. But the core group of people, when we got together a couple times a year at various conferences, et cetera, it felt like we were able to affect some real change at the time. Looking back at it now, I think some of those things, unfortunately, have been undone, and we've got to backslid a little bit. But I think now in private industry, where we are finding ourselves now, we still benefit from that, and we can try to make rapid information sharing better across everybody, because it used to be that individual organizations were like, I don't want to share because of competitive advantage or whatnot, but we're all getting targeted by the same threat actors. And the bet that we're making with the DTI program is that by pushing out research early and often, loaded with IOCs, if it's helpful to somebody, then it's a win. And then now with Wes's work, actually trying to ingest a large number of IOCs and do some smart automation around it, that's something Wes has always been good at. Do it once, okay, do it manually. You got to do it twice, automate. And so that's really the next step in my mind where we're headed, and I'm really liking it.
Can we dive into the example, Daniel, where we talk about DomainTools Investigations, particular research that led to a collaboration with Wes? Can you give us the background and how we got to those IOCs that Wes could automate?
Yeah, we published some research in mid-January around a particular threat actor that appeared to be creating fair good amount of number of websites targeting native Chinese speakers. Exact reasoning, the TBD. You always got to wonder, is there some anti-dissident stuff going on, or just because it's a large addressable market? But the focus was absolutely on native Chinese speakers, and basically enticing somebody into clicking links that then would download rats or various other malware, and they were disguised in various different things. But we found enough commonalities in the metadata that we have access to be able to tie those together and attribute it to what we think is a single actor. And then, as we always do with this type of research, we show our work, we publish the IOCs and various additional information. And I think I started a newsletter as part of the effort of getting the information out there. And Wes saw it, and I was like, wonder what we can do here. And you want to take it from there?
Yeah, first of all, I saw Daniel post a thing, and I try to take my friends' things and at least start to read them. But if you see, if you remember the MyDoom series of malware, where we went MyDoom A to MyDoom 64573, that's when I quit being an analyst altogether. Okay, we've been through this so many times. And you see so many of these blog posts, you're like, I want to read it. I want to understand it. But I've seen so many of these, I don't want to read it anymore. And so I'm always skimming the first ones. I know there's good data in there because Daniel does good work. So we built some tools to do it. And so with some of the previous explorations into this technology, it was, okay, I got to have an analyst sit down and do some really good diligent work, mark up the document, grab all the IACs, put them in my graph. And so I ended up, I left Salesforce last year, and at the height of this AI boom thing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about AI stuff because, and I know people have, the security community seems to hate it. That's fine. I understand. I completely understand that. However, it reads content really well and it pulls ideas and concepts out of content really well. And so I built some technology late last year that helps me read these things and at least get them into my intelligence graph. Help me to find the core concepts, find the keywords, find the threat, if there's a threat actor, if there's a malware name, help me understand those things tied to the IOCs. Because then I'm going to use my specialized tools and go out to the internet and other APIs I have access to and say, oh, there's this interesting thing called ValleyRAT. There's this interesting thing called GhostRat. There's this interesting term called Silver Fox. I wonder what those are. Let me go Google them, which is what you'd have a junior analyst go do. Now, a junior analyst isn't going to understand how to triage that new information, but I built a number of AI agents that effectively do that. They read the initial article, and it's as simple as, I'm in a Slack chat. I take the title of Daniel's article. I say, hey, AlphaHunt, go read this and tell me what's up. It gives me just a summary, just what AI does, just a simple, this is the TLDR. Is it interesting? Because that's how we read. As humans, we look at the top couple of sentences. Is this worth my time? No, it's not. It's not even targeting US-based people that we can tell. Maybe I'll move on. This does a little bit more deep. It tells me the TLDR, and then it goes out on a couple of those keywords. It's like, yeah, but I found a thing called ValleyRAT. I found a thing called GhostRat. I found this I'll call it a TTP or a shared victimology, native Chinese speaking people. Now, obviously there's some nuance there, but at the high level, you understand, oh, there's these three components that in a graph, you could think of those as nodes. I have a connection between these three things. Let me then do a next step, which is junior analyst may or may not do. Let me go Google those three things. Let me find out if anybody else has ever reported on this. It turns out, starting in 23, early 23, late 24, more people started to talk about things called ValleyRAT. GhostRat's been around for a while, so that one's kind of tough. Okay, it's PRC based. It's been around since 2008, 9, whatever. And then lots of groups are cribbing it, grabbing it, reusing it or whatever. And so I was throw that one away. And then there were a couple others. You got Redline Stealer, you got Remcos Rat, Luma Stealer, and there's a lot of gray area here. And so any analyst looking at this is, hey, there's 4 or 5 different intrusion sets here. And it's muddy because there's a lot of groups doing that similar kind of work. Totally, you're 100% correct. If you're a Vertex Synapse user, if your name is Gabe, you're going to sit down and read this, and you're going to draw nice, pretty squiggly lines around every single little cluster. And you should, because you're a seasoned intelligence analyst, and that's your job. But do you get these people who are, I'll say, I don't mean this in a negative way, they're Windows administrators, they're IT workers, they're, hey, we just got hit with Scatter Spider 6 months ago, and now my boss is DomainTools, which we have a subscription to, talks about this Chinese malware thing. Do I need to be worried about it? My boss is breathing down my neck. And I can give you the TLDR in 30 seconds. Hey, it's this. And then if you dig deeper with the bot, so I put the article title in with the bot, and I do a little, hey, you know what? I want you to read this blog item as if you were thinking about threat actors. So read it with a threat actor mindset. Because if you notice in your blog articles, in the second article, you don't mention Silver Fox. You mentioned sort of the TTPs, and then you were going after native speaking, blah, blah, blah. And so when it came back with, hey, it's Silver Fox, or in an AI phrase, it's Silver Fox in quotes. Take that with a grain of salt. When it comes back that fast, and like in the early days of AlphaHunt, it would speculate a lot, which is what they do. But over the years, I ask these questions hard because I want to tune the bot to not make stuff up. I don't want it to hallucinate because security practitioners think AI just hallucinates. It does. It's not any good. AI is a programming language. If you learn how to harness it in as a programming language, it can be very powerful. It comes back with Silver Fox. I'm like, all right, I have to go read all of the content because there's something wrong here. And either I'm wrong or Daniel's wrong, and I'm guessing I'm wrong. Oh, this is part 2 of an article. It says in the title, okay, I gotta go find part 1. I go read part 1. Oh, there's ValleyRAT. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, the theme is targeting certain kinds of Chinese speakers. Okay, that's a TTP, shared victimology. It's a node. And there's one little throwaway line. Oh, and there's this little piece of malware in the middle of the article that says Silver Fox. Okay, so that's not like the silver bullet though. I look at one article, I'm like, okay, some analyst under Daniel or Daniel himself, you look at it, hey, this, and they hedge it, I think they hedge it a little bit. This kind of feels like overlap with Silver Fox, which is great. You guys, this is your bread and butter. You should hedge some of these things because by the time you've written about it, that whole cluster or group may have moved on. I plug those into my Google searches because I'm walking through what did the bot find. And you go back to 22, 23, Proofpoint starts talking about ValleyRAT, and then you start to see Silver Fox become very closely related to ValleyRAT. And again, with a lot of this open source reporting and the fact that you have AI agents reading this content, they can get tripped up. So you could see a blog article about ValleyRAT, And then on the sidebar where their blog is advertising other articles, it could say Silver Fox. And the AI is going to be like, hey, if they're related, you know what? A junior analyst would do the same thing. Oh, I saw the word. So we're still in that mindset. But within, I think this whole report took 10 minutes to write for the AI to finally tease out and write. I had a sense of at least I could go back to an executive and say, this is what they wrote about. Here's who they target. Here's who some of the candidate players might be. And there's this ValleyRAT thing. Now, is it worth my time to go investigate ValleyRAT, do the deep dives, read all the malware, get the IACs in? Maybe not. If I'm a higher ed institution with no intersections with, I'll say maybe Taiwan, Hong Kong, we don't have a good sense on if these guys are targeting mainland China. I don't know there's a lot of data on that, but we know they're targeting externally. So if you have intersections with TSMC or students that come in and out, maybe this is interesting to you. But within 15, 20 minutes, you have an executive sort of style report that allows you to answer those questions. And all of that information is now in your intelligence graph. Because as you're interacting with the service, it pulls down, okay, what did I learn from my own answers? As if it was a team of agents, or put that back in my graph. Because maybe that's not interesting now, but maybe there's a part 3 to this post where I want to go read it and understand it. Now my graph and my bot already remember the pieces of my interaction from before. And so with my friends who I trust sort of their instincts right now, I don't have to double check their work necessarily. And I would go cruising LinkedIn for when they write posts, when they write letters, because you don't know, like a lot of these companies, there's a lot of junior analysts that write letters. They're great analysts. This is not knocking them, but I don't have to double check people who have been in the business a lot longer, and they're going to have a lot more of a twist on things, which is neat. So I went through LinkedIn, I found Daniel's letter, plugged in the title, and started interacting with it. Because on the flip side, I'm trying to demonstrate this too. I'm trying to help junior analysts understand why do I need an intelligence team? Why do I need an intelligence graph? This AI thing is stupid. It doesn't work. And I'm trying to solve all 3 of those problems at once. And so finding friends of the family that have written really good content that you wouldn't necessarily see because it doesn't seem like they're attacking the US. But it's interesting because there's a huge geopolitical bent if you understand anything about geopolitics. And most analysts are still in I like IP addresses, I like hashes, I like the nitty gritty stuff, which is cool, like you should. But there's also that, why are they doing this? Because at some point, if you can find those intersections as an analyst and go to your boss and say, your manager, hey, I was doing this research and I figured out this thing in a quick amount of time, you quickly become the go-to analyst because you can also answer the risk problem, which is what your manager is really concerned about. And that most younger, as a younger analyst, most analysts in general, they like the hunt, they like the fight. It's getting them. I've been in middle management for a number of years, and so I stretch between the two. How do I take what Daniel wrote in this team, all that great work, and make it not just actionable at a low level, but tie it into geopolitics, tie it into that risk decision. Hey, it might not be worth your time, but you know what? Given what's going on in the world and that shift on our national security policy from one area to the other, it starts to become more interesting, especially if you live closer to the West Coast where there's more of that prevalent population. It does become an issue. So on the East Coast, like there's some pockets of it, sure. But if you've got 200 actors, is this interesting? I'm not sure. I got to read a lot of words and then tie things together. And you're probably not going to stick your really high level principal analyst on it. You might stick a junior analyst on it. But man, they're not going to really, like GhostRat and ValleyRAT are going to look the same to them. What I'm trying to do is help them elevate one versus the other really quickly in the context of what they're reading. So if you have a co-pilot on your shoulder, reading these things with you and then recording, making notes for you so you don't have to, that gets you one step closer to, we have these intersections. We should buy more domains tools. We should go pay them for this other service. We should actually go on, and do more with it because we can make it actionable at a risk level, not just at a low level IAC.
I think that's a really key point you're making in our industry, especially for those of us who work for companies who are in the business of making money. That's a corporation's main goal. The risk mitigation part, I think, still, even all these years later, sometimes takes a back seat. And you can't be perfectly secure. That's an illusion. But as we've always tried to approach these things, it has to be risk-based, and the really high, massive risks need to be mitigated as good as possible. On the long tail, yeah, can you protect everything? No, but you also don't have to. But how do you decide what is the high risk and what is the thing you should keep you up at night versus, yeah, that's nice to know and I'll keep it in the back of my head, but ultimately doesn't register right now. But it also could come back later. So I love this idea of having your intelligence graph constantly evolving and adding things, because something may later come along that then ties back to that. As a human analyst, that's really hard. The really good ones, have a memory like a steel trap, and they're like, I have seen this before. many years ago, blah, 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 blah. That's hard to teach, and it takes a long time in the actual field to be able to utilize that. So having a tool that can take those kinds of things is very interesting.
Yeah, what the biggest, as I'm helping, I had seen parts of it in previous jobs, and as I'm helping bootstrap this, I'm giving a shout out to the Vertex folks because they open source part of it. Go find it. Go look at their YouTube channel. You're a new analyst. I don't care what intelligence graph you use. You need to go watch their YouTube channel. It's just how to think like an analyst from the ground up. And so they do a really good job there. But it struck me as I started to put, I've never been a big fan of MITRE. Like, I know those guys. I love that they care about the fight. But then you get into that nitty-gritty detail again. I'm just, it goes over my head. I like the shiny things. Let's go on to the new things. Let's build something new that solves a really hard problem. And so I never really had a healthy respect for it until I started implementing it in the graph and realizing all those years I was wrong about MITRE ATT&CK, about iBox, about I fight with these guys. I can't believe you're doing this. There's IOCs you can put in your sensors, and they're like, no, but you got to model these languages. You got to do all this hard stuff. I'm like, it's just not interesting. And then I start putting MITRE ATT&CK data into the graph, and the light bulbs start going off. The thing that connects the actors to each other is planet Earth. Like, planet Earth is a node, or they're all in China. You're looking for these weird connections. Turns out MITRE ATT&CK is actually really good. Tom Millar, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but you were right. I was wrong. You put these TTPs in the graph. Those are most of the connection points. There's a common thing that a lot of these actors do that relate them together. And it's not any one common edge. It's a couple of them. It's they're targeting native speakers. They're using a tool called ValleyRAT. They're operating in this time frame. And you get 3 or 4 of these lined up together, you can very quickly come up with attribution's a tough word because nowadays APT actors, quote unquote, are using e-crime actors, quote unquote, to obfuscate what they're doing. And there's a lot of contract work. We're getting to the my doom problem where there's so many that most folks in the industry, especially the younger ones who are just getting into it, there's too many names. Vendors are just trying to take your money because of all the names, and I can't keep track of all. They're not wrong, but there's so much nuance that you can make or break your business out of understanding the nuance. If you understand the nuance between those 2 different actors and you prioritize one or the other, you can save your business, because if it's that one that's coming after you and not the other, and you have that great MITRE ATT&CK framework, the TTPs that are documented in there are that linchpin. It's the best we have. Like, there's always improvement. When I started pulling those TTPs into my Vertex graph, and it clicked, it was, if you have a giant graph and if you pull all the data you can find, because the guys I work with do not delete things ever. Like, I'm a big delete fan. I'm forgetting things. I forget things all the time. I love it. It makes my life so much easier. All my analyst friends, they do not delete anything. They carry it with them until they're dead. In their grave, it's going to be a laptop with them. Going to have all their data, all their SQLite databases, all their Python script is going to be, buried with them. But once you pull all that stuff in there, making sense out of it, finding those common connection points end up being mostly, I'll say, MITRE ATT&CK TTPs. And so one of the things you can do with AI is graph and AI is the AI models that have been trained on publicly available data understand roughly what a TTP is. They understand roughly what threat actors are. And there's some training, there's some secret sauce involved, like you have to get them up there, but then they can pour over the data and they can find those commonalities. They can say, hey, yesterday team member A was working on this threat actor, intrusion set, cluster, whatever your terminology is. Day 3, this other person on the other team was working on this other collection, and they have different TTPs and different names and wholly different things. And one of the things I do in my system is periodically it goes through, hey, what nodes did we add today? What nodes did we update today? What were team members working on? Can I find edges between those 2 clusters? Because what we do traditionally is you're all in a Slack room together, or you sit by the water cooler and you're talking about things like, oh, I'm working on this and that, and there's the edge. It's that TTP. You can use AI to do that too. AI to sit down and pour over those things you're working on independently, bring them together, because it understands the majority of tactics, the majority of software elements or procedures or techniques are all like variations of each other, but they're well understood at this point. In 2018, 2019, we still had that learning curve. 2025, if it's known, it's probably out there. And you can use these automations to connect those dots together. The MITRE framework really does a great job of delineating those. And if you can use AI to, hey, I've got 2 clusters that look different, look separate. There's a common node called planet Earth. It's not helpful, but if you can work your way down towards a couple of common TTPs or a couple common shared victims, node similarity is the term that's been floating around. It was when I pulled those TTPs into Vertex and started watching my analysts have to do this manually, I thought, oh, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be an automation in there where something can crawl through those, find some kind of common TTP. And maybe that's not the common TTP that really strengthens your argument, but there's one and then two and then three, to the point of Daniel's original article. You get 3 or 4 TTPs, there's a version of that where it's good enough, at least to answer the initial question. Then you decide, hey, this is interesting, we should prioritize this. Yeah, then you're going to stick your principles on it, go spend 2 weeks, do a deep dive, really manipulate your cluster. But it was that sort of painstaking, watching my peers have to pick and choose which they're going to go after. I think we started out with a threat actor list of 200 actors, and there's no way you can, monitor all that. But if you can pick apart those TTPs that are common, you get them in your graph. Another interesting thing happens. Those TTPs become hot nodes or hotspots or whatever you want to say. Like, there's lots of connections to those TTPs. So if you're going to your management and you're saying, how do we solve this intelligence problem? How do we solve these threat actors? Hey, here's the top, not forget tracking top actors. You should have a list and just an idea of who's coming after you, who's trying to break into your house. How are they doing it? I bet you'll find 4 or 5 common ways they're all doing it. And if you can knock out 50 actors with one fix, risk mitigation point of view, that's huge. If you could sit down in your organization and say, hey, we're tracking these 20 actors. Every single one of these could be mitigated if we use FIDO2. You could probably knock out 100 actors at that point if you come up with that. But we don't do that. As analysts, we like, hey, we here's the IOX, here's what they're doing. It's really cool. Yeah, there's mitigation, but it's all in a vacuum. It's all like a one-off. If you can present a report that says, hey, I did this deep dive and I found out like we can knock out 50 of the top 100 actors by doing FIDO2 and phishing our users every day. I know that used to be controversial. It is what it is. If you start red teaming yourself every day and you implement FIDO2, the majority of the actors you read about become noise. Not that they can't get in, because there's always that backdoor somewhere, but the majority of your risk is bought down. Your insurance takes care of the rest. And as an intelligence community, we're not doing a good job of presenting that case because we don't have the data in one spot. We can't look at all the data in one spot. And God help us if we actually start making connections between all the things. And that takes time and people. And there's just not enough of us. There's not enough analysts out there. The boomers are retiring and we're down people across the economy, and intelligence analysts are coming out. But again, small percentage of people we need versus the number of adversaries we have. Like, the scale is not there. And the only way we solve this problem, or at least get ahead on it, is how we present that risk up the chain. How do we say that, hey, if you knock off this one risk in your risk register, it's worked out 25% of your risk. And on one hand, analysts don't think like that. On the other hand, risk people, they see this stuff in the news, and the news makes it look like everybody's a threat actor and they're all coming after you. They're not all coming after you. And how do you describe that to people in a way that makes sense on both sides?
And I think this is where those of us who found ourselves in management now, for some reason, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, but the sort of to use a old Farsightism, the shiny city on the hill that we're all trying to reach is this sort of real-time intelligence sharing between desperate entities, right? That's something we've been trying to crack for a really long time. And I'm not sure we'll ever be successful of it because of the aforementioned competitive, blah, 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 this and that. But imagine large enough entities with reasonable resources having all of their own intelligence graphs, but then somehow being able to in real time connect them, or at least have intersections where you can exchange some of that stuff. That could be really powerful. And I hope we get there. It's funny you mentioned MITRE Tech Framework. I felt very similar about this. I think we owe Tom like a case of beer, wherever you are, Tom. Hope you're doing well. But we've had many late night discussions with that guy and, trashed his idea a little bit, but turns out he was right. I have to say that as well. It's really exciting to me to hear from somebody like you who I know and trust and respect that AI, this is one of the, at least in our industry, one of the best use cases I've heard in a while. I'm at a conference right now, can't tell you where or how, but I've talked to some of our colleagues here, and I've heard similar things. Like among the DomainTools company folks, I'm certainly known as an AI skeptic, and I'm AI averse. That should come up to no surprise to anybody who knows me, but I am certainly leaving open the possibility that there might be some good use for it. There's a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of BS out there that I don't particularly care for. And I think there's also this rush to market because if you're not doing it, then you're behind, et cetera. I'm glad that we as a company haven't quite taken that approach. We've used ML and that kind of stuff under the hood for years. It's not Gen AI, but it's still a form of AI. So I'm certainly not fundamentally opposed to it, but a bunch of the large language models, especially the ones that just hoover up the entire internet and then try to make a business out of it, not a fan. But for something like what you're describing, especially if it's a local model that uses your data and does things without having to be fully connected to a large store, and you never know where your data is going to go. I think for that kind of use case, this is fantastic and can actually, for the first time that I'm agreeing that this will save time from a human in a meaningful way without cutting corners. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, there's a learning curve to it all. And I was fortunate in my last role because we were very, they wanted us to bake AI into our roadmaps. And if you're a threat intelligence person, you're like, but I've got so many other problems than AI. And there's a struggle there. But as you pull it back a little bit, there's a learning pathway most people take. And they look at AI was pitched as you can just talk to it. It passes the Turing test. It's like talking to a person. It's a programming language. And it's like talking to Python. It's just if you understand how LLMs work, it's a function of the previous tokens, the previous words. So if you give it a bunch of garbage, it's going to spit out nonsense. Just like junior analyst would. If you say, junior analyst, go read this. And again, if you're a junior analyst, take this with a grain of salt. We love you. We want to help you. We want to get you to the point where you're just out far superior than the people around you. But if you look at them and you're looking to make a name for yourself as an analyst, you're going to read a bunch of stuff and you're not going to really understand all of it. Yeah, you're going to still write a report. And it's going to be mostly accurate because if you're a good analyst, you're going to fact check some of your things. And that's how LLMs kind of work. Now, what do we do? And I was fortunate enough to find myself in a number of leadership positions. It turns out I'm not. I liked the opportunity. I don't like managing people. I'm not great at it. I'm good at bootstrapping, entrepreneur type stuff. But I learned enough of the management lessons where, yeah, you trust your people to do good work, but you also fact check the younger ones to help them not learn the mistakes and learn the things they should. The LLMs aren't much different because I've been so fortunate over the years to work side by side with analysts. And B, I'm not going to consider myself an analyst, but at the same time have that mindset. I understand how they tick. I understand that they're going to hate certain things if I present it certain ways. And so you have to take the core LLM idea and surround it with guardrails. It's you could go ask ChatGPT what Silver Fox is, and you get a reasonable response. It's not like it'd be wrong, but it's going to treat it like a junior person who doesn't understand the nuance between Silver Fox and APT 41, because there's some blog articles that talk about both. And you get into that speculation, is the nation state stuff backing the contract stuff? Are they separate? It doesn't really know the nuance. But I've worked along analysts side by side long enough that I understand a lot of the nuance, certainly not all of it. But what I do, there's a custom, think of the way I'm developing AlphaHunt is a custom set of guardrails around it that is very domain specific to geopolitics and threat intelligence. And in this version that I wrote the Silver Fox article, quote unquote, the Silver Fox article with, is we added peer review. And so what do you do with a team of analysts? You're going to write a report to your boss, to your manager, to your VP, to the whole organization. You're going to peer review the crap out of that, because if you're wrong by a little, intelligence teams have it hard enough, let alone if they make a mistake. And if you have that management background, that giving someone, an LLM, a junior mid-level analyst, a report and say, go write this report and we're going to use it publicly, you're probably going to team them up with a principal person who's going to fact check them. They're going to review the work, they're going to tweak it, and they're going to say, go find these other things. LLMs, not much different. You can reuse teams of agents that initial agents go fact check, they're specialized that I'm going to go Google stuff and bring it back. And then you have other agents that are specialized in threat actors. You have agents that are specialized in malware. They only know their one little discipline. And with AI, you'll see some of these larger companies, they'll try to tackle the big research problem with one AI, saying, hey, I'm a big generalist. I can think about everything. And that's where you fall off the rails. Because as a person, if you're a big generalist, you're a high level person. You don't know about the low level nuance, you're gonna make a mistake. But you're gonna use specialized low level people. I don't mean low level, not smart people, but specialized cool people. Hey, you're really great you're a malware reverse engineer. Go reverse this malware. Go look at this threat actor. You might have a threat actor person, a malware person, and you're going to compile all those results into more of a general report. And the AI tools you build shouldn't be much different. And so with AlphaHunt, what I've been trying to do is, listen, the first iteration was more, you'd get a couple of, hey, I want you to cite your work, and it just make up a URL. It's like, oh, you want me to give you a URL? Here's a URL. And the mandate was bought by Google, so that URL is no longer valid. And work through that. But then you start to pull these things together where maybe there's a better team-based approach. And you can think of AlphaHunt more, hey, I've got a virtual team of specialists that go out and do their own little individual things. And if you, just like a junior analyst, you put blinders around them and say, you're only doing this one thing, they're less likely to hallucinate. They're less likely to mix them up. They're like, oh, you wanted me to Google ValleyRAT. Here's 2 paragraphs on ValleyRAT. It's probably not wrong. You have your principal analysts sit down and review their work, give them some ideas. If they go back and Google, If I go Google ValleyRAT over here, I find 3 other things from, Proofpoint might have been the first people that really talked about ValleyRAT back in 23. And so they find these deeper articles, they bring those back, and I have a well-rounded report. AlphaHunt tries to take that kind of approach. And so you have to get past that, AI is good for summarization, because there's a lot of young people running around saying AI can do better work than them, therefore it is the thing. And what they don't realize is those 20-year-olds don't have the expertise to know that the thing they got back was a good start, but there's that 20 years of domain knowledge that you can mix on top of it. And again, now you're taking principal time, and what we try to do is, I've been sitting here watching analysts struggle all my life with the hard parts. I understand most of the nuance. And then I put them out there. Like what you saw with Silver Fox, I'm sure a really good analyst would look at it. Hey, you made these 4 mistakes and you're really speculating at the bottom. Like, you're right, I am. And at the beginning of the article, I'm like, I'm really speculating here because it could be wrong. But I want to demonstrate, and I used to build a lot of open source software to get that feedback. And so now I'm doing it with the content. Okay, if you go back and look through the AlphaHunt blog, back like last 6 months ago, you'll see some really rough, what are the top 3 C2s in the world, or C2 frameworks in the world? And there's some mistakes there, but I get the really good analysts who sit down and read it and then say, hey, you're wrong here, here's why. And it really enforces you to sit down and make it better, faster, better, faster. Much like we did with some of that technology back in the day, where it got really good because we were using it. We were making mistakes with it. And so now I'm at the point where I want to take like your articles and really put it out there that I really do wonder who's behind this. I don't know, because it doesn't say in the first or the second one. Turns out it says it in the first one, and I learned like a bunch of stuff really quickly.
So that's actually good feedback for us too. We don't want to make it harder. Keep that in mind when we do future multi-part things, to actually reference back a little bit more, like almost like a recursion. But
that means people will go click on it. You can put the links in there. People are not going to go click. A couple people will. Most are going to do what I did, but that's not a bad thing. It's, you do need some of these, now I'm speaking my book. You do need some of these services where people have that pain. I want to read all that stuff, but there's so much of it.
Yeah.
That this is a really cool technology to, if it's positioned well. Look, it's not going to be perfect, but I can get the gist and realize, oh, I can write this one off because it's targeting the other people, or hey, within 20 or 30 minutes, I have an idea of what's going on. And that's where maybe DomainTools, you said you're a little bit hesitant. That's where you take that first step is, you see this a lot of the news sites. Their big foray into AI is, I'm going to put the bullet points up front. And the intent of, what are the mitigations? What can I do about these things to hook people in? And then you get into the deep dive, because there's a great corpus of data in there. There's a lot of things you could do to mitigate. Is how you hook them in the early stages, especially if they're not your core audience, if they're not, hardcore analysts who want to understand sort of the malware reversing. Versus the, hey, if you're looking to make sure your boss understands this, something the analyst can copy paste and hand to their boss and then read the fun parts. And you get both, and AI is a cheap way to dip your toes in the water, but at the same time provide that actual value and understand, okay, what are the next steps I need to do to start trusting where it's useful. Never going to replace analysts. It's never going to replace practitioners. It's just not, it's not a technology that lends itself to that. But to scale you up as an analyst or as a writer, there's a lot of cool things you can do to set yourself out there in less amount of time, make your time used more efficiently.
Do you find that like members of our community and friends and former coworkers or whatever, they offer you fair, candid feedback and like actually read your stuff and call things out?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I got a core group of friends who are not afraid to kick me when I'm down, which is great. I wouldn't want it any other way. It's when you get that deafening silence, that's the hard part. This happened with putting out open source stuff back in the late 2000s. I loved it when people said something broke, because that's the next lesson you could learn, and you pile those up and you get something that's pretty special. It's when you get that deafening silence that it's, okay, I'm either not on the mark, people are busy, or I'm just way out there. And this one's been interesting because, again, most security people look at AI and it's so prone to false positives, it's not worth my time. But over the last couple of months of writing and getting more and more people posting it on different social networks, the feedback I've gotten has been pretty gut-wrenching, because you're getting to a place, and this is where you read the Silver Fox article, I put it up front, I am speculating here because I want to. Turns out AI is really good at making things up. And if you can harness that, you can start to teach younger analysts where to think next. It doesn't have to be right. And this is where you get into the forecasting. I want to know, go back to a comment you made, Daniel, earlier about the older folks who have that sort of back-end history. What other threat groups are like Silver Fox? What did they do next? Because you get these cycles of, okay, it's maybe not an APT in the nation state in the traditional sense, but they're contracting out to some smaller, younger group because they have different TTPs and they don't want to get found out. If they are successful with 1, 2, and 3, where have we seen this life cycle before? What other groups can we tie this to? And the Silver Fox one is interesting because I've seen this a number of times now where I'm actually using the speculation to our advantage. I'm saying, this is a speculation. This is the forecast. Who knows if it's going to come true? But I want to ground it in analogies. We've seen other actors, if they are successful doing these three things, look out, because I think right now they were going after like tax companies and financial sector stuff. They're starting to pivot towards healthcare, which is obvious if you've read enough of these reports overall, like finance, healthcare, great. But then then they start doing ransomware. And so ransomware becomes this obfuscation that, okay, I don't need to worry about this because X, Y, Z, but then you see the ransomware pivot where they might sit there and Trojan you and try to find stuff. And then if you find them, the added risk of not just adjudication, but you owe them money, like to kick them out. And if you're a junior principal analyst, okay, that makes sense. This is where everything leads to ransomware these days, because at least at the end of the day, maybe you'll get some cash out of it too. It works for North Korea, why can't it work for everybody else? And so you get into this speculative piece where AI is really good at this. And if you give it the right guardrails, you can really help teach some of these younger folks. Here are the next couple questions to ask, and here's some suggested pivots. And in helping them, they may come back with a report, but did they know to ask these next questions? Did they know that the next leg of this, if they're successful, is this other TTP that they're not aware of? And this other TTP leads to, wait a second, there is a threat actor I'm concerned with that has this shared next TTP. They're not there yet. They're not exhibiting that behavior yet. But if they're successful, their life cycle suggests that. And AI is great at that. Analysts are terrible at that. Analysts don't want to do it. Analysts are like, I want to give you the facts. Nothing but the facts. And even some of the facts, if I'm not sure about those facts, I'm not going to tell you. And that doesn't help risk managers because they want to know what's possible. And that's what if you're a red team, they'll give you those facts. And again, there's the intersection between the people who are writing the deep dives and the red team and trying to bridge, like, how do I help them get to the next layer and maybe have my red team start emulating some of that behavior so I can start preemptively getting in front of the threat actors versus always being behind.
Yeah, I think one of the takeaways definitely is, and any of you junior analysts that may be watching this, building your own community and networking and staying in touch with your peers is so critical. Here we are, we've known each other for 20 years and we're talking and we're still trying to solve important hard problems, but being able to get that feedback and be able to have those conversations is key. And most of us in this space that we've gotten to know each other in the early 2000s, we're all pushing 50 now. So we're like all of a sudden like approaching the old fart territory when we were in our 20s and we're like, oh yeah, the old guys over there, what do they know? Or, oh, you can't talk to them because they know so much and they would never dare speak to us. But we went over and be like, hey man, what's going on here and there? And so I hope this new crop of analysts coming up are really trying to do that as well. I went to a threat intelligence conference last year, first CTI in Berlin, and there's about 200 people there, and I knew 2. I was like, what?
How'd that make you feel?
This is, yeah, I came to realize, oh crap, they're all in their 20s. I am the old guy now. It was heartwarming because clearly there's a next generation that bothered to come there and participate and do a bunch of things. Great. But also, oh, okay, so now we got to make sure that we, in addition to trying to solve the world's problems, we also drag along and take care of these more junior folks so they can be us in 20 years.
Yeah, I think, and to your point there, I realize I went off on a rabbit trail on your earlier point. I take the point of view, you've been through enough of these communities where I'm very not part of most of them anymore, just because they eventually cycle out. So you had FIRST, which was great, and you had some of the telecom communities, and then you had some of the trusted. You have to know people for a couple of years to really, build a relationship there. And the industry's changed so much over the years that we didn't have good technology, so we needed more of that peer-to-peer mechanism. And now companies have come up and said, if you can't afford to send people to all the conferences and build those relationships, you can buy these tools like DomainTools, others, to be those relationships for you. And that's as a proxy. And so my view has always been these communities cycle in and out. The last group of people I worked with, it was all, I don't know, one of the PGP was coming back in style. And so they're using PGP or one of the, I couldn't even tell you what, it wasn't even a Signal. It was, hey, we're all on a Signal chat together kind of thing. Because they know, like, we want to keep those groups nice and tight, nice and small. And that's hugely valuable because that's how the big mitigations happen. It doesn't happen. You see all this kind of turnover with the change in administration. There's a lot of private industry folks that have been doing this for a very long time, regardless of administrations. And it happens. They're just not public about it because A, they have families, and B, like, they're just small groups trying to do the right thing. And they're all out there. Now, government plays a great role in it and help facilitating national critical infrastructure. There's an intersection point, but they're both big behemoths. You have the government sectors and the DIB, and you've got the private industry. That's all happening everywhere. You just don't see a lot of it. And there's not any one big cabal. It's all just, we went to a conference, we had a beer, we talked about, hey, we're both going after this actor. And that's how a lot of these things start. I take the point of view that there's a lot of that happening if we just build better tooling that helps you automatically. And in previous roles, that was part of the tool. It was you had investigations and you could work with your partners within the framework to build out an investigation. And then it dawned on me is why do I have to remember to do all that? Why do I have to document stuff? Why can't I just interact with, and I've had this idea since we had SESBOT in the REN where you could ask it for, hey, I've got an IP address. Is it a bad thing? Now, why doesn't the robot just record your interactions and stash that in memory somewhere? Not just for you, but so that as you're working together with your team, all that shared knowledge in your team, and I'll use team very loose quotations. A team could be an intelligence function within a single company. A team could be a botnet threat working group where they're trying to tackle a specific actor intrusion set. In the back of the day, it was a botnet or a piece of malware. Team can mean whatever you want it to mean. But if you had a piece of functionality where you had your own dedicated graph, your own dedicated knowledge base, and your own dedicated AI API to interact with as a team, you don't actually have to remember to share the information anymore. You can, and you should bubble the good things up to the top. But I should be able to work because we're such a global, cabal. You should be able to work independently and have that shared knowledge within your compartment. Share that knowledge with each other. And so if I ask a question that somebody else asked 12 hours ago, and there's 15 Slack messages between me and it, like my answer should be predicated on that knowledge that was already there, whether I'm a single intelligence function or a team of like-minded telecoms working against the Typhoon groups. And so I'm taking that approach. I know others, MISP has its own functionality where you can interact with other MISP. At the core of it, if you just share API data back and forth, you're doing the first good step. Hey, you've got a MISP instance, I've got a MISP instance, let's pull feeds. I've got a Vertex instance, you've got a Vertex instance, let's pull feeds. If you're doing that bare minimum, that's great because now you're at least trading indicators. As you get into the more sophisticated things, I want to see people trading more, hey, these common TTPs, these shared victims. These groups are going after these types of victims. That's the thing. It's soft and fuzzy. It's not as tangible as an IP address. And I think those are some of the things we're missing. And then the government does a great job at that. All the contracts, you are going to use sticks, you are going to use taxi, you are going to use MITRE. And that's great. And they're probably the closest that most groups are doing to sharing the TTPs, sharing the mitigations. I'm sure it happens in the private sector, because the private sector, your intelligence function is a cost sink. You got to pick and choose what you do. And if you can tie these things together where you can make your operation a profit center, you can sell your intelligence to your customers, you can do whatever with it. You'll have more free time to think about TTPs, to think about actors, to think about those mitigations, justify the expense, and start sharing the high level stuff that's actually going to put a bigger dent. Like right now, I think the majority of the industry, we're still at we'll share kind of the TTPs in free text. But there's not, and again, I have a very limited view. So if you're doing this and you're going to yell at me, send me hate mail. Tell me you're doing it. I love it. I want to know more about it. But I feel like we're still at that level 20 years later where we're sharing more low-level artifacts. And these high-level things, like maybe we'll present about it at conferences, these high-level mitigations, they're hard because you have to get justification from you have to get the okay from your legal team to say, hey, I want to talk about how this Fortune 500 company is protecting itself against bad guys. That feels like proprietary trade information. I don't know if we want to share that stuff, but that's the stuff we absolutely need to, keep beating the drum, because God help us if every network is segmented, everyone's using FIDO2, and we're phishing our users so much that they look at these things as like just noise. Like the problem, I'm going to say goes away, but it becomes more and more attainable because everybody has a shared understanding that, no, really, FIDO2. No, really, FIDO2. No, don't even build an intelligence team until you have FIDO2 installed across all of your stuff. And why? Because I've written 50 of these, and every single time MFA is the first thing that pops up. Oh, spear phishing. Oh, they're doing that. Doesn't matter to the actor. It's all the majority is spear phishing and trying to break into stuff. And you get FIDO2 and you get a good spam appliance, and you're 90% of the way there. Then you can go build an intelligence team, and then you can share data with all your friends. And if you can level up like that and show that, I know it's really good for the business to send me to these conferences and go talk to people, go have beers with people. And that is not like, there's not a negative connotation on it. It's like, hey, no, this will actually save us. Like we spend $5,000 on a conference, and they'll save us $1 million a year in just intelligence costs alone, let alone if we actually get a bad guy. I think a lot of people still miss that. And we've been talking about that for 20 years. And I think a lot of people still miss that part because they can't tie what they know in their heart to be true, that they know they need to go, solve, map it all the way up to that risk mitigation. We're like, no, I'm going to save you millions. The average breach is whatever it is, and you want to nickel and dime me over going to first. Doesn't make any sense. It's never made any sense, but we don't do a good job of costing those things out and helping people absorb those soft costs so they can go meet people and share that data.
The good news is there's a bunch of stubborn bastards like you and I who are just not going to give up. If it takes another 20 years, hopefully we'll have made a difference.
Right.
I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you both joining us today on the Breaking Badness podcast. Wes, where can people find you if they wanted to reach out and had more questions?
Google CSIRT Gadgets or AlphaHunt.io. CSIRT Gadgets is the parent company. AlphaHunt is the service. I'm on LinkedIn, CSIRT Gadgets on X, AlphaHunt.io on Blue Sky. Reach out, especially if just questions you want to test it out, test drive it. I love people kicking the tires and just telling me what makes sense, what doesn't. And like I said, my main motivation is to help bridge that, even for principals. I don't like writing nobody likes writing intelligence reports. Nobody likes doing that hard work. Nobody likes training new people. It's really hard, and new people really need it. We are desperate to find more analyst talent. And so if my tools can help you, or anybody, go to Vertex, work with some of the intelligence companies like Q, Intel 471, DomainTools. If you're not using PDNS in your investigations, you're doing it wrong. Like, those are the kind of the core concepts. And if I can help you point in those directions, like my tool, I use it every day. I've learned more about threat actors in the past 6 months, in the past 5 years. But any of those technologies, like I want people to learn this stuff and make their jobs easier, because I'm really in it to really send these people back to the drawing board. Send them back for 2 years, 3 years, that's a huge win. And if I can help analysts learn how to do that more quickly and really propagate that knowledge up the chain to make them better analysts and make them more trusted amongst their managers so they get more resources, then that's a huge win, regardless of the technology they use. So find me anywhere there, reach out. I'm more than happy to shoot shop with you or send you in the right direction, because there's a lot of great people out there who we're building on top of ourselves.
Awesome. And Daniel, where can people find out more about DomainTools Investigations?
DTI.domaintools.com is where we release our reports. I typically post about them on various socials. I'm at Dan on Security on pretty much all the socials. I prefer Mastodon. Starting to do a little Blue Sky. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've got a newsletter if you want to subscribe to that, and we'll hopefully put out some fresh stuff here pretty soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you for being here today. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and we will catch you next week for another all-new episode of Breaking Badness. Thanks, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter at DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.